human data by default is biased. So human data equals bias. And then the other consideration, and I really like the comparison with the food delivery process. So we see the final outcome, but there's this whole process behind it shaped by humans with different steps and stages. And so basically what you're saying is that because human data is already inherently biased, we have to deal with some ethical considerations there. People who are shaping the narrative have certain bias, certain angles that they view the world from, and that is limiting. And so that is an ethical consideration. Another ethical consideration is the process itself. So for example, how it's created, who is working on training the models, are they even aware of the broader context? And so that's another consideration. I think we tend to talk about AI like this all-knowing oracle, but in reality, it's built by people with all of our blind spots. How do we move past the myth that AI is something almost divine or all-knowing and start acknowledging this very human fingerprints all over it?
I think one way is, when we were kids, we were dismantling telephones to go and try and see how did they work and how did they look from the inside. And you may not go as far as analyzing in depth every single AI model that is thrown at you, but I think curiosity and generally trying to understand a little bit more of what's behind the technology is definitely a great defense mechanism. I want to reconnect for a second to the principle that you were mentioning earlier, where all data, all human production is biased. I'm not sure if we should use the bias word in every situation, but definitely we all have a point of view and we all have an opinion. So it will be partial because of the way we've been receiving information, the way we've been processing, our emotions attached to it, our views of the world. There's definitely a point of view. And whether that could be called a significant bias or not, it really depends on the situations. What we try to do, we try to balance it out. We try to be as objective as possible, welcoming as many point of views as possible. And it certainly becomes bias where things get skewed and directed somewhere, whether it's unconscious or whether it's even malicious or manipulative behavior. But there's some opinions that go beyond being genuine opinions, but they're actually things that are said and written with the exact purpose of directing people's behavior or people's ideas toward a certain direction. It has been happening throughout human history in any form of communication and content production. Why should it then happen with AI models too? So we need to be mindful and careful about it. And now this is partially an answer to your question, where, wait a second, let's be attentive to what is happening and let's try to understand what is going on. But all I can add is try to be mindful of what the responses of the AI are, and whether or not there's anything left out, whether there's language that is showing that there's a certain point of view or opinion that is prioritized over the others, whether there are elements that we need to train ourselves in recognizing, hey, this sounds like a very culturally influenced opinion, and I need to research a little bit more. The same way we multiple newspapers, and where we try to get a sense of what is going on, we should at least read multiple news sources. So checking those sources, checking the consistency of the responses, checking how those responses may be influenced heavily by certain point of views are definitely good habits to develop when we're using LLMs, what we're referring to as AI now. And again, maybe later we can expand a little beyond LLMs, which, again, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, LLMs are any model like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, right? So they're creating text and they're interpreting your language, your textual questions.
My following question is related to something that a famous anthropologist, Gregory Bateson, said. He was warning us about confusing the map with the territory. And so, in other words, mistaking our representations of reality for reality itself. How do you see that playing out with AI right now? And are we starting to treat the AI map, sort of the outputs and the simulations, as the territory itself?
That is a wonderful, wonderful question, and it connects with the bias as well, the cultural mapping and the bias. So because we're talking about cultural mapping, you're putting Bateson on the map is the territory versus the map is not the territory, and that is essential. So of course we're confusing the map with the territory, and perhaps we shouldn't. But then what Bayesian adds to it is maybe the map is the territory provocatively, as in for what we need, that's perfect for our scope anyway. So this all starts with the Korsbisky conversation around the map is not the territory. So the idea where we draw a map of our reality, and even just because the reality we mentioned that earlier is mediated by our senses, that alone is already a reason for us not to be able to fully see and understand and perceive reality. So we're mapping the territory in a way that necessarily we're leaving something out. For instance, I don't know, if you draw a street map, it's not necessarily counting the number of trees that you will find along the road. It's really just mapping the road so that you can drive from point A to B. And that map is there for a reason, for giving you a chance to reach point B from point A. So all that matters really is that road, right? So right now, me and you were talking, and our viewers are viewing, the listeners are listening, and all around us there will be ultrasound that we cannot perceive, or there will be infrared light that we cannot see. So obviously that is not part of our map, but it is there. If we put a machine that is capable of detecting infrared wavelengths, we will detect them, but we can't see them. So definitely, even just because of this sensorial limitation, the map is never the territory. That understanding, whether it's a language mapping, whether it's, like we're creating this cultural representation of reality, that Korsbisky point of view where, wait a second, the map is not the territory, is perfectly valid and definitely needs to be understood. Then Bateson picks it up again, going like, yeah, the map is not the territory. And at the same time, the map is, if we're drawing a map for a certain scope. So for instance, in the ethnical research, Bateson wrote, if we go to a certain population and they have the belief that the sneezing is caused by evil spirits that are coming out of your nose and they will enter other people's nose, that will cause people to put some distance between one another when they're sneezing and when they got a cold, because they may be thinking, oh, wait a second, I need to step, away or stay like, I don't know, like 2-3 meters away so that the spirit don't get into my nose. And for the purpose of not creating a spreading of that disease, so making sure that people don't catch a cold, for that purpose, it's absolutely relevant whether you know that the cold is caused by germs, viruses, whatever, or whether you believe there are spirits, because the end result will be the same. You will keep that distance. That cultural mapping of reality, even when it's completely incorrect, it serves a certain scope. That's where Bateson comes in and goes like, well, the map is not the territory, and maybe the map is the territory, because we're achieving that results that we set ourselves for, and we don't need anything else. So if we need a road map and a street map, and it's mapping that road effectively for us to go from point A to B, but it doesn't really count how many rocks, how many trees are along that road, aside the road. It doesn't really matter for our scope. But then again, with AI, there's a bit of a risk, because the AI is going to serve you for a certain scope. It will try to draw conclusions based on the relationship between different elements, establishing a correlation, but without necessarily understanding why certain things happen, as long as it works. And that kind of mapping may not be completely usable. Like, it will cause us some issues along the way. It might serve you for that specific scope. But while you're driving from point A to B and you don't really care about the number of trees along the road, there may be things that should be mapped and should be part of that. They shouldn't be included for ethical reasons, for balancing out biases, etc. And as long as we reach our target, we start not caring about that.
Yeah.
But if we care about the environment, maybe knowing that in the past 30 years the trees along the road have completely disappeared, it's an important information. And when we start drawing maps one on top of the other with specific purposes, and we stop looking at other things around that should fall into that map, we should be aware of that part of the territory, because it leads to other much dangerous consequences. That's something to start caring about, start thinking about.